It's Thursday, the 20th of October. This is Politics Live from Westminster, as the Prime Minister's future hangs in the balance. Joining me today, Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood, Shadow International Trade Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Associate Editor of The Spectator, Isabel Hardman, and The Times' Rachel Sylvester. Today, this from one of Liz Truss's close cabinet colleagues.
Do you believe that she will definitely lead you into the next general election?
That's what we will be working towards, and we hope that we will be able to do that whilst delivering, so that the British people understand exactly why it's important to support the Conservative agenda.
You hope, but you don't believe.
I'm a politician. I'm all about delivery.
That after chaos following a vote in the Commons last night that left Tory MPs in despair.
I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
And she's out, and he's in. First it was the Chancellor, now Liz Truss loses her Home Secretary. Tory MPs are asking how long this can go on for, as more of them join the ranks of those calling for her to go. Also today, as Ukrainian forces continue to make advances, what will be Putin's next move? Well, the last 12 hours have been pretty extraordinary. I'm saying that an awful lot at the moment, and at least 14 Conservative MPs have publicly called for Liz Truss to quit as Prime Minister. Dozens of letters of no confidence. You can see number 10, the famous black door. Letters of no confidence have gone in to the senior Tory MP, Graham Brady. He's chair of the influential 1922 Committee of Backbench Conservative MPs. And now we know that Graham Brady is inside number 10, talking to the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Let's just show you this tweet from the BBC's political editor. Sir Graham Brady, the senior Conservative MP, responsible for establishing whether a Tory leader has the confidence of their party, is currently in number 10, talking to the Prime Minister. Well, a member of the 1922 committee, Miriam Cates, talked to World at One, BBC radio programme, a short while ago and said this.
I think it seems as though her position is untenable now. But, let's see what today holds. But from my point of view, it does seem like the confidence of MPs has been lost. And I don't know how that would come back, really. Last night's scenes were very distressing, humiliating in some ways. And the number one job of government is to get MPs through the lobby, to get government business through. And that clearly was very difficult last night. The Prime Minister's position does look difficult, if not impossible.
Right, you can hear the full interview at 1 o'clock on The World at 1. It's the end game for Liz Truss now, isn't it?
Well, let's just slow down. Let's pause. Let's tie our shoelaces. We need to regroup. There's no doubt about it. What we saw last night, as has been indicated, was unedifying. The nation demands better. And I urge all parliamentary colleagues to recognise that the nation wants to see one thing at the moment, and that's the economic plan. That's Jeremy Hunt's ability to get the fiscal statement through. Once that is done, then we can turn to the very difficult issue of Conservative leadership. But to actually mix the two would be more problematic. For those demanding her to go now, what is the plan? There's no roadmap. There's no easy solution here. There's no candidate in the waiting. So all we do is confuse the situation, make the matters worse. If she were to walk out, if she were to walk out the door today to say, I'm going, there would be a run on the pound. Interest rates would then go up. We would see us in opposition for a generation. That is not responsible governance. So we have this fiscal statement coming through 31st of October. By all means, slide your letter into Graham Brady if you must. But let's keep it in-house and let's have that very difficult conversation which the Prime Minister must address after that about her own leadership and where the country goes.
Do you think the only reason in your mind that she isn't quitting or being asked to quit by Sir Graham Brady and others is that there isn't one candidate that you can coalesce around to replace her?
It isn't just that there isn't one candidate, but there isn't a roadmap for us to get us there, because the system at the moment obliges us to go to our membership. So we have a bit of space if we are to hold our nerve, allow Jeremy, as I say, to offer that fiscal statement, to work behind the scenes. And we're seeing that perhaps taking place here today.
All right, Rachel, is it the end game for Liz Truss?
I think it is. And Tobias talks about slowing things down, but it feels now as if events are accelerating very fast. And the government and the Prime Minister are losing control. There's this sense, you know, I thought a few days ago perhaps it was a question of whether it was days or weeks. Now it feels like is it hours or days or maybe even minutes. Sir Graham Brady is in there. If the Prime Minister says to him, does my party have confidence in me? What can he credibly say? He can't credibly say that they do.
There were chaotic, confused, angry scenes in Parliament last night as MPs voted on a motion to ban fracking, which turned into a confidence issue in the government. I mean, at one point, Isabel, the Chief Whip and the Deputy Chief Whip were said to have resigned, and then a few hours later unresigned. You tweeted this. This is from the Deputy Chief Whip. It has been, obviously, the expletives deleted out. Craig Whittaker has just come out of the lobby and said, I am effing furious and I don't give a fig anymore. What was it like when you were there?
Oh, it was chaos. And one of the things that made it more chaotic was in the minutes before the division, the vote was called. Graham Stewart, the minister, told the chamber that this clearly isn't a confidence issue, at which point Tory MPs went bananas and started asking, you know, are we going to lose the whip if we vote against the government on this? And he said, oh, well, that's a matter for the party managers. So they went into the lobbies, checking their phones to try to get the whips to clarify what was going to happen if they voted against the government. And they didn't get that clarity. Then I understand, and thank you for censoring my tweet to make it a little bit more palatable, but as well as Craig Whittaker, who'd given the instruction earlier in the day that this was a confidence issue, as well as him being furious and sweary, apparently Wendy Morton was walking out saying, I'm not the Chief Whip anymore, you know, this is unbelievable. She was absolutely furious. The Prime Minister had to physically chase her around parts of the estate to try to find her. We then got clarity at about 10 p.m. We got a message from Number 10 saying the Chief Whip and the Deputy remain in place. And then at 1:30 in the morning, we then got another message saying the Prime Minister has full confidence in the Chief Whip and the Deputy, and that there was some confusion over whether it had been a confidence issue, but this was being treated as a three-line whip, and MPs were going to be dealt with in a proportionate manner.
And we still don't know exactly how those MPs will be disciplined. What did you see, Tobias? Were you there last night? Were you, Nick, there last night?
I was there last night. I saw shouting, certainly. I saw what looked like a very chaotic scene outside the Conservatives' division lobby. And it just looked like a government that has ceased to function. And I know, you know, Tobias puts the point about regrouping, but why should the country have to put up with this? Why should the country continue to put up with this latest episode in the Tory psychodrama, when my constituents and people all around the country are facing inflation at over 10%, the Tory premium on all our mortgages is going to be filtering through? What we need is a government to actually grip this situation, not this continuing Tory chaos.
They shouldn't have to put up with it, and they deserve better. And we, as I say, we need to regroup, we need to sharpen, we need to show discipline, and we're not seeing that right now. And a lot of this goes back to some schoolboy errors that were made during the leadership contest itself. I mean, the fact that Liz Truss and her team only invited those who supported Liz Truss to be part of the team, immediately alienating all the One Nationers. And yet we see the replacements taking place. Jeremy Hunt, Greg Hands, and now Grant Shapps. These are moderate, sensible voices that are now coming in to balance what's happening in Cabinet. But it's all very, very late in the day, arguably too late in the day. And party discipline is absolutely critical if you want to win votes. And like I say, these are very difficult questions. We can agree where this all might go. I stress that what the nation wants to see, what's going to happen to pensions, what's going to happen to benefits, what's going to happen to interest rates and mortgages. We can get that sorted with Jeremy Hunt. Then we have this very, very difficult question that must be addressed. And this is where Liz Truss potentially must come out and ask either for a vote of confidence or put up her hand. But in the interim, what is the process? What is the plan? What is the roadmap to get the consensus out there? Because unless you have something that lands that everybody can agree with, who wants to be Prime Minister right now, then I'm afraid we're in a mess. There's going to be more breakdowns, more divisions, and more problems in the party as well.
Right. I mean, is there anyone you could coalesce around?
No, you're now asking me the very question that we need to avoid. We must take this behind closed doors. That's what the party must do. We can be, in the past we've shown this, be ruthless and resolute about resolving these matters. Right now we're not. We're looking ill-disciplined and out of control.
Right, for some... Yeah,
Could I say, rather than this take it behind closed doors, what about the public? The Conservative Party were on the second Prime Minister, the fourth Chancellor in as many months, the third Home Secretary. The public should be having a say in this. We can't continue...
No, that's wrong. And under Gordon Brown, you know that as well. We don't elect a president. We elect a party, a governing party. It's for the party to determine who the Prime Minister is. I hear this argument to say, let's go to the general election. Let's get the economic plan out. Let's see us regroup. And then potentially we can think about the general elections. But to call this now, I think, is taking advantage of the situation.
If you are delaying, it's the public that is paying the price. So a Tory MP texted me as I was on the way into the studio saying, we just have to remember the voters are terrified. This is frightening. This is affecting real people in real time right now.
Focus on the economic
but the longer
plan.
all this chaos goes on, the more frightening that is for people. And you've got, you know, the Chancellor changed at the time of a cost of living crisis. The Home Secretary changed at a time of national security crisis. It's incredibly unsettling, and I think the longer the kind of limbo and chaos goes on,
and
the worse it is.
we're paying the price for the ridiculous economic plan that was put out during the summer. We should never have got there. Big mistakes in the method in which we got there. That needs to be corrected, and we're in the process of doing that. The reset is happening.
But just to come back on Tobias' point, there is no example where Labour has changed Prime Minister twice in the same Parliament. And secondly, what is the mandate that Liz Truss now has? The mandate she seems to have acquired from the membership has gone up completely in smoke. It now appears that Jeremy Hunt wants to bring about austerity Mark II. There is absolutely no mandate for it. So if there is a desire to get a mandate for it, one should be sought.
Just before you, Prime, I will let you reply. I mean, there are some of your colleagues who already think it's too late, that Liz Truss cannot regain any credibility or authority. Let's just listen to one of them, Charles Walker, last night.
This is an absolute disgrace. As a Tory MP of 17 years, who's never been a minister, who's got on with it loyally most of the time, I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
So you seem quietly...
I'm livid. And, you know, I really shouldn't say this, but I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
Do you disagree with any of that, Tobias?
No. There's a powerful statement there, and we should learn from it. You go back to this point, though. The anchor that brings together all wings of our disparate party, One Nation on ERG, is the 2019 manifesto. And I'm afraid, going back to the original discussion about fracking, we should have honoured that. And that's half the problems that we had last night. We need to get through this. I don't disagree that there are some difficult questions. I don't know what's going to happen to Liz Truss, but debating this and saying, let's get rid of her today, where does that take the country? I go back to the point, sorry to go on about it, get the economic plan out there. At least the markets then will have some more stability. The nation will know what's going on, and then we can deal with the politics.
I think there is an important point in what Tobias is saying, which is that, well, obviously we're in chaos at the moment, but there is no sign, no route to less chaos. I mean, I think, you know, getting rid of Liz Truss probably is inevitable and something that a lot of Conservative MPs would quite like to happen imminently, but as to who would take over, even if there is a sort of gentleman's agreement between the grandees, which, given the average level of sort of ego and potentially delusion amongst a lot of senior Tory MPs, is still going to be quite difficult. Even if they reach that, you're still going to have chaos within the Conservative Party, partly because the party doesn't know what it stands for anymore. It didn't manage to resolve that issue over the summer, and a lot of Conservative MPs who I talk to think that they need time in opposition to work that out now.
Right, well, a clear demonstration of that, of course, was the other bit of drama that unfolded last night, which was the forced resignation of the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She was forced to resign after sending what's been described as a confidential, market-sensitive piece of information to a backbench MP over immigration policy. But the letter that she then sent to Liz Truss was pretty explosive, a devastating attack, really, pretending we haven't made mistakes, carrying on as if everyone can't see that we've made them and hoping that things will magically come right is not serious politics. I have made a mistake. I accept responsibility. I resign. She goes on to say, we'll just pause for a minute while we get the rest of the words up. I have concerns about the direction of this government. Not only have we broken key pledges that were promised to our voters, but I have had serious concerns about this government's commitment to honouring manifesto commitments. Was it the right thing for her to do, to resign or be forced to resign, Tobias Ellwood?
This is the action she took. She makes a point that it is that, going back to that point, that anchor that links us all together, the one that we were elected on, which is the 2019 manifesto. I think there's something else going on here, which I'm not comfortable in discussing as to where things will go, what her plans are in the future. I'm a One Nation Tory. I believe that we are at our best and at our strongest when we're centrist in our model. We see that going back to Margaret Thatcher, that gets talked about all the time. You know, she had Ken Clarke and Heather on one side. You had Norman Lamont and Tebbit on the other. We had the best, the strengths, the big beasts from across the party. And what we saw going on there, I'm afraid, going back to the modelling of seeking support only from party membership, is that our party has shifted to the right. And parties, whether at the right or indeed to the left under Jeremy Corbyn, don't get elected.
Right, so you're pleased to see the back of Suella Braverman, who talked about a dream. Her dream was to see that first flight go to Rwanda, deporting... Well, that's what she said. Hang on, that's what she said. I will.
The strength of our party is the fact that there is Suella and there is Ellwood in there that offers the country the fact that we have this balanced amalgam of what the Conservative Party is.
But they can't agree.
On the Rwanda piece, this talk about pushing back boats, you know, is simply not enough. That's not the bigger picture. Where are these people running away from? Why aren't we trying to solve the problem at source? That is completely missed in this migration debate.
The front page of the Daily Mail, Rachel, is Suella's 90-minute shouting match with Liz. It comes down to what Isabel has said, that the party hasn't agreed where they are on key issues like immigration. And we understand that the dispute was actually over lifting restrictions on immigration in order to boost growth ahead of that statement at the end of October. Is that the problem here?
Absolutely. And the fact that there's a mismatch between what the party members voted for and the person that the MPs voted for in Rishi Sunak versus Liz Truss. But I think you're right, there is this fundamental divide, and Suella Braverman is signalling that she is not going to go quietly. She is going to put herself up as the kind of figurehead and champion of the right of the Tory party. So if the kind of centrists think there can be a nice behind doors stitch-up to get a kind of centrist leader in place, that's going to be very difficult. She's going to kick up against that. So that she's been positioning herself with the members at the party conference and in that speech about, you know, the wokerati, tofu chomping wokerati, as this kind of flag waver for the right. And it just highlights the fact that the party has a fundamental divide. Going back to Brexit, that they haven't agreed even on what Brexit was.
We're going to talk about that towards the end of the programme. Suella Braverman has been replaced by Grant Shapps, who actually during the Tory party conference said Liz Truss had just 10 days to turn things around. Now he's in her government. Earlier this morning, I spoke to the Dover MP, Natalie Elphicke.
Well, I think the Prime Minister is clearly in a bind, and it's difficult to see how she is going to get out of that. I mean, it is very much a tricky spot. It's been an extremely difficult few days, and we can't carry on like this.
Is it time for her to go now for the sake of the party and the country?
Well, as I say, I do think she's in a tricky spot. I think things have got extremely difficult for her. But the bottom line is, I think she needs to set out how she is going to lead in the way in which she set out she was going to lead during that campaign over the summer. Certainly what I've seen over the recent weeks is a very different Liz Truss as Prime Minister from the Liz Truss on the leadership campaign. And I think it's important that she sets out urgently what her leadership priorities are.
How long has she got?
It has been a very, very fast-moving episode over the last hours, let alone days. I think that the mood in Parliament is very concerned among Conservative MPs. This is not a situation or a way in which things should be operating, and is absolutely vital that action is taken, because we can't carry on the way it is.
Does it need to be resolved by the end of today?
This is a very fast-moving situation. It has, I think, accelerated in terms of the timetable of concern. Going back just 24 hours, I think there was an expectation that no action would be even considered ahead of the next budget event on the 31st of October. The events of the last 24 hours have, I think, accelerated concern, and there is a great deal of anxiety among MPs about where this is now going.
If by the end of today nothing has changed and you haven't heard those priorities from Liz Truss, would you say that she has to go?
Well, I do think she is an extremely difficult spot, and as I've said, I think she is in a bind, and it is difficult to see how she moves forward from it. But I am prepared to continue to listen to her as the Prime Minister. I am prepared to hear what she has to say and consider what is in the best interests of my constituents and indeed our country.
Have you put a letter in to Sir Graham Brady?
Well, I don't think that now is the time for speculation about letters. As you know, the rules are that letters have no effect for another year, as those rules stand at the moment. I think what we're talking about is very much a crisis of leadership for the Prime Minister. It has been an extraordinarily difficult 24 hours. I do think it's important that we see whether she can move forward from those events. I am prepared to listen to her on that, but ultimately things cannot continue as they have been.
I mean, that does sound like you are on the edge of either calling for her to go or putting a letter in if you haven't already.
Well, I supported Liz Truss in the final runoff in the leadership campaign. I wanted her to succeed. But as I say, I've seen a very different Liz Truss as Prime Minister to the priorities that I supported in her leadership campaign, be that immigration, be that small boats, be that compassionate conservatism in terms of looking after the most vulnerable and the elderly during this cost of living crisis.
Yes.
So I think there are a number of areas in which we have seen a different Liz Truss. Now, of course, everyone knows in politics that things change and you do need to adapt, but this feels more fundamental than that. It feels like a different set of priorities.
Tobias?
I mean, fascinating hearing that. And I think going back to Rachel's, I think, important point of what happened during that contest when promises were made that simply wouldn't survive contact with reality.
And they haven't.
And I'm afraid, perhaps urged on by certain wings of the media, she thought she was infallible. And with this shock and awe economic plan, wanting to go way beyond what the original manifesto said, and as I say, going out on a limb, not including the rest of the party. And yes, the Reset Party. So first time people were able to react to this was during party conference, when they were saying, hang on a minute, and it wasn't until Wednesday that we started to regroup. But it's all very late in the day, arguably too late.
Stephen Crabb, former Work and Pensions Secretary, is now calling on Liz Truss to consider her position. So, of course, the number of Conservative MPs calling on her to do that is mounting. Should the next leadership election, whenever it is, be decided by MPs only?
Yeah, sorry, I meant to say this. This is William Hague who changed the rules. He's now advocating going back because absolutely it's the questions that you ask the MPs are very different to the answers and questions that you're going to get from our membership as well. But any person, any colleague of mine, I humbly say this, who says she has to go, has to then offer what the plan is to then replace. And that plan isn't there yet. And that's why I suggest it's done behind the scenes, get on, allow the economic plan to come out
all right.
and absolutely address this in a couple of weeks' time.
Well, the plan could be there. Surely, just before you respond, Nick, the Daily Telegraph has Liz Truss has to go if the Tory party is to have any chance, I should say, of recovering, and that is Lord Frost, David Frost, former Brexit minister. So, again, yet another senior politician calling on Liz Truss to go. Nick?
But this chaos is just continuing, isn't it? And the damage is done. Tobias talks about now having another leadership election where only MPs take part. But look at the damage that the Conservative Party has already subjected the country to with the leadership election it's just gone through over the summer. We then had essentially an economic experiment where people are going to be paying the price for months to come. It's appalling. And how on earth the Conservative Party is just not in a position to be trusted with governance anymore.
Just to bring everybody up to date, while Tobias is nodding in agreement with a Labour politician, talking about the chaos that has ensued. Let's just show you number 10 Downing Street. We said Sir Graham Brady, the senior Conservative MP, there he is behind the umbrella, going in to see the Prime Minister to talk about, probably at her behest, I have to say, whether or not she has the confidence of her party. Well, let's take a pause, because while chaos ensues here in Westminster, the war in Ukraine continues to intensify, with fears over what the Russian President Vladimir Putin may do next. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has been in Washington over the past few days, talking to his counterpart there about how to counter the increasing threats out of Moscow, particularly around any use of targeted nuclear weapons. Let's talk to the BBC's Moscow correspondent, Steve Rosenberg. Steve Rosenberg, can you give us a sense of what is happening there and the state of Vladimir Putin's mind?
Well, I wish I could get into Vladimir Putin's mind and get out again and be able to tell you what he's thinking. I can't. I can just base my conclusions on what he's been saying and what he's been doing. Clearly, he's a leader who's under pressure at the moment. His so-called special military operation has not gone according to plan. It was only supposed to last a few days, a few weeks maximum. That was 8 months ago. And actually, Russia's been losing some of the territory it occupied in Ukraine because of quite a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive. So how does he react to all of this? Not by throwing his hands up and saying, by invading Ukraine. He reacts by doubling down and by trying to tighten control. That's what we saw yesterday. He issued a decree which imposed martial law on the 4 Russian-occupied Ukrainian territories. And crucially, it also introduced a sort of a multi-layered security system across Russia, introducing restrictions on travel in certain regions closer to the border with Ukraine, by ordering that all Russian regional governors would have to meet the needs of the Russian armed forces. So clearly trying to batten down the hatches internally here. As far as externally, you know, what we've seen from President Putin in the last few weeks is escalation, followed by escalation, followed by escalation. You know, mobilization, the attempted annexation of these Ukrainian territories, that wave of missile and rocket strikes across Ukraine recently. He comes across, or the Putin-mobile comes across as this car that doesn't have a reverse gear or brakes or possibly a steering wheel, and it is careering down a path of escalation at the moment.
Right. I mean, is there no chance of de-escalation? Clearly, the meeting with Ben Wallace and his US counterpart, looking at what can possibly be done if things take another turn for the worst.
It's a very difficult situation, right? Vladimir Putin is in this very deep. And at the moment, there is no sign of de-escalation from him. There is one thing, though, you know, the geopolitical poker player that he is, or always has been, I think he probably thinks he has a strong card in his hand, which he may play before any possible nuclear option, right? And that is the energy card. Because I think Vladimir Putin still believes that the cost of living crisis in Europe, the energy crisis in Europe, will help him, that at some point during the winter, European governments will come crawling to him on their knees and say, look, we give in, we will remove our support from Ukraine, just give us cheap energy. I think he believes that is still possible if he's given time to play that card. He still comes across as someone who's confident that he can win this conflict, both in Ukraine and against the West.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, thank you very much for talking to us today. We're going to go into the Commons because Ben Wallace, we've been talking about the Defence Secretary, has been updating MPs and said this to them in the Commons.
On the 29th of September, an unarmed RAF RC-135 Rivet Joint, a civilian I-Star aircraft on routine patrol over the Black Sea, was interacted with by 2 Russian armed Su-27 fighter aircraft. It is not unusual for aircraft to be shadowed, and this day was no different. During that interaction, however, it transpired that one of the Su-27 aircraft released a missile in the vicinity of the RAF Rivet Joint beyond visual range.
Ben Wallace there, how serious is that, Tobias Ellwood, obviously as chair of the Defence Select Committee?
Yeah, I mean, this is an escalation. This is where Putin wants to take things. He wants to actually provoke us. His back is against the wall. He's losing this. Who'd have thought that Ukrainians would be actually pushing back against the 3rd largest army in the world? And Stephen was absolutely right. We need to understand Putin better as to where mentally, psychologically, he will go. Because I think we need to be prepared for, I'm afraid, the unthinkable, that he could possibly either use a tactical low-yield nuclear weapon or indeed attack a nuclear civilian power station deliberately to provoke because he's losing. And this is his war. If he loses, it's his reputation. It's probably the end of Putin.
Nick?
Well, look, there's a cross-party consensus about this issue, and that's an extraordinarily serious incident that Ben Wallace has described. And it just reinforces the need to stay strong. We are resolve here in the United Kingdom, but also the Western alliance. Putin has had to withdraw from that offensive on Kyiv. The Ukrainian counter-offensive in the east of Ukraine has been significant. He clearly is being pushed back. But in that situation, of course, we can't predict what Putin does, but we have to be clear that Putin must fail in Ukraine.
Let me just show you this headline in The Times. It's from Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, head of the Armed Forces. Army must be war fit in face of Putin threat. Is it war fit?
No. We are overstretched. The Army, the Air Force, the Navy. I've been saying this for some time. We've reduced the number of personnel. We've reduced the number of F-35s from 138 down to 138 to down to 48. We've reduced the number of Type 26s and Type 45s. We need to recognise that the world is getting more dangerous, not less, not least in Eastern Europe. And Britain is a nation that steps forward, arguably more so than other nations do. We have a leadership role as a P5 member of the United Nations Security Council. We can only do that if we lean in with our hard power and recognise where the world is going.
Is it a red line for you, the 3% of spending, increasing defence spending by 2030 to 3% of GDP? Everything's on the table, Jeremy Hunt said.
Well, I'm pushing very, very hard to make sure that everybody understands the relationship between our economy and indeed security. What's going on in Ukraine? Food prices, because those ships can't get out of Odessa.
So is it a red line?
Into that, well, I don't know, what does a red line mean?
Well, a red line means if Jeremy Hunt says, I'm afraid we can't keep to that commitment, even though we've spelt it out, what will you do?
Well, I'm going to keep pushing for it. If I'm a betting man, I would say he actually will honour it. Because, as I say, our economy will start to falter. Our prosperity will be affected unless we stay strong, as I say, because we are so open. We embrace globalisation, so we're subject to international headwinds, arguably more than others. If we reduce our defence budget, it affects the whole of the economy, it affects the whole of the Treasury. It won't just mean less money for defence, it'll mean less money for all government departments.
Well, let's hope they're listening to your pleas there, Tobias Ellwood. Just before we move on, as I said, Sir Graham Brady, the senior MP, he's in side number 10 with Liz Truss at the moment at her request. Apparently she wanted to find out the mood of the party from him because, of course, he is the man in charge of testing the temperature within the Conservative Party, the man who receives any letters sent in to him of no confidence. He's had a very busy time over the last several years when it's come to leadership contests. Now, let's go back to just a few weeks ago because events have moved at breathtaking speed. And in the last week, even more so. Let's have a look how Trussonomics has been reduced to rubble.
and you'll be Chancellor and Liz Truss will be Prime Minister this time next month.
Absolutely 100%. I'm not going anywhere.
This is the plane carrying the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, we understand, who cut short his meeting to New York.
He's out. He's been sacked. So Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, he can only have been in with Liz Truss for a matter of 10, 15 minutes, if we understood the timing correctly. He's gone.
Today, I have asked Jeremy Hunt to become the new Chancellor.
We will reverse almost all the tax measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago.
Gone, 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 that's kept, gone, 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 gone.
This government will take the difficult decisions necessary to ensure there is trust and confidence in our national finances. That means decisions of eye-watering difficulty.
Let's talk to Ha-Joon Chang, SOAS University professor. His new book, appetisingly called Edible Economics, A Hungry Economist Explains the World, which tries to make economics accessible to all of us. Hello to you.
Hi.
Why did Trussonomics go wrong?
Oh, they were basically trying to do something that has never worked. The trickle-down economics that never works, especially in the rich countries. But in the case of Britain, even when Margaret Thatcher tried trickle-down economics in the 80s, actually the investment and growth was lower than in the 70s. And in the last couple of decades of austerity and failure to invest, now Britain's ability to supply the goods is seriously depleted. So whatever incentive you give in terms of taxation and so on, if the people with money don't invest and don't increase productivity, it's not going to work.
Right,
unfortunately, that's come back to haunt us.
You say it's never worked in the past. It wasn't going to work on this particular occasion. But does that mean that the policies themselves were wrong? Is there anything wrong with having an ambition to cut taxes in the way Liz Truss and the government initially set out, going for what they called a growth plan? Was it more to do with how they executed that plan, that the timing wasn't correct, that they disbanded with the sort of Treasury orthodoxy, as they called it, rather than the plan itself, when we've looked at pretty anemic growth for the last decade?
Yeah, you needed a whole package. I mean, this country's the productivity has seriously stagnated in the last decade, falling further and further behind comparable countries. And the quality of the infrastructure is low. The education and skills policies are not working. So unless you have those supply side capabilities, it doesn't matter what you do with taxes and stuff like that, because the economy is not going to respond to those. Yeah?
All right, well, stay with this. I know that you broadly actually agree that it was an experiment that went wrong. You said so earlier in the programme. But who has been in power since 2010 with all the things that we've just heard there that weren't in place anyway? Conservative governments.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that they had this model, the Truss team, that they wanted to bring in, and thinking that they could do it at any time, not realising how exposed we are, as I touched on before, to the international headwinds, and also the fact that we only had 2 years to implement it. So even if there was a sense of pain...
I've heard that from you. I'm talking about the conditions that preceded this. The last 12 years, Tory governments have been in charge.
Yes.
So they are to blame. You are to blame.
Well, in one sense, but there's also other factors to do with the Brexit decision, which also impacted on our economy. The modelling of Brexit that we got is not as optimal as it could be. That was a decision by the nation to take us there, but the economic package that we've ended up, I think, could be improved. Then, of course, you had COVID, which added a 400 billion
shocks to the economy.
And then finally, I should say, we have Ukraine, which has absolutely impacted on inflation too.
Professor, can I just ask you about what Tobias Ellwood said there about Brexit and Brexit modelling? How big a factor was that?
Well, the Brexit was the very serious self-inflicted injury, but Britain's economic problem has deeper roots. I mean, let's not just think about what Britain is facing, but what other countries are doing, facing similar conditions. Despite having the same the external problems, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, these countries are investing 25%, 26% of their GDP. Britain is investing only 16 to 17%.
Well,
I mean, how do you plan to compete with other countries if you're not investing in machines and R&D and education and skills?
All right, well, let me just show this headline in The Guardian. Trade from UK to EU 16% lower than if Brexit had not happened, report finds. You've suggested rejoining the single market. Do you stick by that?
This is such a toxic subject for the Conservative Party. I'm, even reluctant to sort of talk about it now. It's so sensitive that you dare not mention its name. But absolutely, from a single market perspective, or going to the Norwegian model, it would solve the movement of people crisis. We don't have people in Bournemouth for hospitality and so forth, and it would help with the migration issues as well. And of course, because Europe is our biggest trading partner, half of our goods and services go there. It would help with that too. But the Conservatives, because we've pushed so far on Brexit, you really can't entertain this subject at the moment. It's very difficult indeed.
You would agree with Tobias, though?
No, I mean, the Labour Party's position is not to rejoin the single market or the customs union. Certainly, what we have to do is look at the trade and cooperation agreement and tear down unnecessary trade barriers within that. But the reality is here that Trussonomics completely failed. It's been tried in the past. This idea of borrowing, of unfunded, reckless tax cuts.
Most of which you supported. But can I just come back to Brexit? Can I just come back to the issue of Brexit? Because it is fascinating to have a Conservative MP who is more pro-EU than the Labour Party.
Well, look, we can all express our opinions on this, but the point is that I certainly am in favour of pragmatically, as Keir Starmer has said, out looking at the trade and cooperation agreement, how we can get trade to be flowing. But opening up, once again, the single market or customs union argument, I think, will just lead to further instability in the country's interest.
Very quick comment. Can I just say, I'm advocating what Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage and Dan Hannan wanted, which is just the single market. That's all I was pushing for, not going back into EU. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants another referendum. But we do need to look at the engine room and say there's a better economic model for Brexit.
Isabel?
I actually think some of the emotional problems within the Conservative Party at the moment are because of Brexit. Not in the sense that you're saying, but actually that, it's been a feud in the party since the 90s. And to a certain extent, that feud has now been resolved. And it's a bit like a family that has sort of built its entire way of operating around having a feud. The feud's gone, but they still sort of want to hate each other.
But also they haven't decided really what they wanted Brexit to be. So there was always this internal tension within that Brexit coalition between the kind of liberal free marketeers who wanted the Singapore-on-Thames version of Brexit and the more protectionist Little Englander in the stereotype who wanted to kind of low immigration, not deregulate the country. And that was never, ever resolved. And that's what we saw kind of now playing out in the Tory party. The problem with Liz Truss's agenda is it was sort of ideology running up against reality. So she had this thing about Treasury orthodoxy. They were mistrustful of the OBR. They didn't want the OBR to run the slide rule over their figures. But in fact, it turns out that's just economic reality and the sort of markets spoke.
I just want to thank Professor Ha-Joon Chang for joining us to talk about the economy, because I'll just remind viewers about the meeting between Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, and Graham Brady, the senior Tory MP. We understand Jake Berry, the party chairman, has also gone in. This is quite a long meeting involving senior members of the Conservative Party. I interrupted you when you wanted to talk about Trussonomics.
Well, the point I was going to make is simply that Trussonomics has been tried before. I mean, I was on an alternative programme the other day talking about the early 1970s, 1972 budget, another Conservative government that had problems producing growth. They tried to borrow unfunded tax cuts, and it led, I'm afraid, to fueling inflation. It led to cutting public spending. This was tried again as some sort of experiment on the British people. And once again, we've got a crisis made in Downing Street. It's going to be working people paying the price of this.
And you'd like a general election as soon as possible?
We'd like a general election as soon as possible. The Conservative Party is incapable of governing anymore.
That's all we have time for today, although there was quite a lot to talk about. Thank you to all of my guests for joining me. I will be back with more Politics Live tomorrow at 12:15. You can follow on BBC Two and on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you.